Hey everyone, welcome to Crime Family. I'm your co-host AJ, and I'm here with my co-host and sister Katie. As always, it's just the two of us this week because Stephanie is sick, and so she wasn't able to record with us today. But hopefully she'll be better and back next week for next week's episode. So this week we are actually going to be talking about a case that is pretty new, and it's still a developing case. It's happened just over the last couple of months, and it's been pretty high profile and in the news. So if you do follow the news closely, you may already know about this case and some of the details about it. But I did want to just cover it on the show because it's quite wild. And I will put a disclaimer. So some of the details in this case are disturbing, and it does involve child abuse. So if that is, just wanted to put that disclaimer up there up front, just in case, if you didn't want to listen to details that are related to that. I'm not going to go into all of the super in-depth details, but just enough to kind of give you a basis for what this case is about. So this case all really began on the night of February 17th, 2025, and it was just after 8:30 p.m. when firefighters rushed to the scene of a house fire in Waterbury, Connecticut. And first responders moved quickly to contain the flames. They made their way inside the home. They stumbled upon something that was far more disturbing than the fire itself, and they realized this was definitely not just a regular house fire. It was something much worse than that. So as the first responders go into the home, they actually find in one of the rooms an emaciated man. He's trembling and has an indication of some kind of abuse has taken place. And the truth was much more horrifying than they could have even imagined. And it actually came out that this man, he started the fire himself. He used printer paper, hand sanitizer, and a stolen lighter. He said that about a year before the fire, he discovered a lighter in his late father's coat, which he took and used to help start this fire. And that it was not just a tragic accident, but it was an intentional fire that was set as a final act of desperation. So when authorities questioned him, the man revealed a horrifying reality that he had actually been captive inside that home for more than 20 years. His stepmother, Kimberly Sullivan, along with his now deceased father, had allegedly imprisoned him, tortured him, and starved him for decades. So pretty crazy just on the surface, but as we go deeper into this, it gets even more wild. So there is actually body cam footage from the night that the first responders responded to the house fire, and it captures the frantic reaction of Kimberly Sullivan as the weight of the unfolding series of events becomes clear, and what had begun as an emergency fire response had turned into something much darker. So I'm actually going to share my screen to show the body cam footage. It's about the piece I have here is about a minute and a half, and it's kind of like chaotic and frantic, but I'm going to share it because it does kind of set the stage for things. So here it goes.
Come over here. Go down the road. Come on. Come down. Come down.
Come on,
Who
down.
else is in the house? Who else is in here?
My stepson is in here.
How
I'm
many
trying to
other
have him help
people?
him out.
Listen,
That's it. I have 2 cats.
Everybody's out,
Yeah.
but your stepson's still inside.
Yeah, he's right here.
Okay,
yes.
come out. Come down the road. Come on. Come on.
Come
It's not safe to stay here. Come on.
All right, here he is. All right, my dog is
Come on.
shaking.
I know. Come down here. That's 287 code 3 victim. Fire victim.
Okay.
Come on.
My
80
dog
seconds right here.
is. I
Come
know
on.
my dog.
I know. Come on.
I'm coming.
You're seeing it. That one victim right here. I need to stay over here.
So that's the body cam footage that has been released. I guess, Katie, what do you think of that when you first see it, or initial reaction? I know, like I said, it's a little bit chaotic, but if you had any initial thoughts.
Yeah, it's definitely chaotic, but to me, like, just looking at that, you wouldn't think that there's really anything going on other than there happened to be a fire in this house and they're taking the stepson to the hospital because of that. Other than that, like, I guess the stepmother, I guess it is, seems very worried about her animals rather than her stepson. I mean, I'd be worried about my animals too, but I'd be frantic about, like, the kid in the house, or not even a kid, but the other person in the house. But yeah, other than that, just seems like there's a fire, a little bit chaotic.
Yeah, and as we'll get into, like, the details of the case, yeah, you're right. She does seem obviously more concerned about her animals. So basically what's happening in that, if you were just maybe hearing the audio, or if the video was just, you know, a little bit hard to follow. So the woman you heard screaming is Kimberly Sullivan. So she is the stepmother of the victim in this case. And she's screaming, she's standing outside the house and she's screaming to her stepson who's inside. And, you know, says she's trying to get him to help get the animals out. She has some cats in the house that she's concerned about, but she doesn't seem overly concerned about her stepson, which is weird. She's just screaming for him to help get the cats out. So I think, yeah, very chaotic, but I don't know. It doesn't really seem like she's too worried of, like, oh no, they're taking him into the ambulance and there's potential that, you know, they're going to find out all the stuff that's been happening inside that house allegedly. So yeah, so that's kind of where it all kicks off in this case. And so as investigators dug into the details a little bit more, they uncovered this story of relentless cruelty and failed intervention. So the victim, his name has not been released to the public. So he's just known as male victim 1. So I'll just be referring to him in this story as the victim. So he recalls the abuse actually started when he was just 3 years old. And he is 32 at the current time. So, you know, that's over almost 30 years ago. So an article about this case from USA Today says, quote, "At 3 years old, Sullivan's stepson recalled sneaking out of his room at night to look for leftover food and drink, according to the arrest warrant. At this young age, he would begin to be locked in his room during the evenings once wrappings from the food he took were found," the warrant says, end quote. And so, like I said, the victim, now 32 years old, was removed from school at just the age of 11. His father, Craig Sullivan, and stepmother, Kimberly, informed school officials that they would be homeschooling him. And from that moment on, over 20 years ago, he pretty much vanished from the outside world. And according to ABC News, the Waterbury police chief said that the victim's biological mother hasn't been involved in this man's life since he was about 2 years old. And that the man's biological father was wheelchair bound from a medical condition. So it seems as though the boy's biological mother was pretty much out of the picture. And as soon as she was out of the picture, the abuse really began because, like I said, she left his life at around 2. And then he recalls at the age of 3, it really started. So Kimberly Sullivan's attorney, so she's the stepmother, said that her stepson's late biological father, quote, dictated how the boy would be raised. So, yeah, over the years, this is what the male victim has explained to investigators in this case. So over the years, he was confined to a small 8 by 9 foot storage room, which was locked from the outside. The lock evolved over time. So it started as a chain lock, and then it became a padlock, and then it was like a sliding bolt lock. And probably as he got older and maybe he got a little bit stronger, they had to kind of change what type of lock was on this door so that he wouldn't be able to get out of it. Also, bathroom access was largely denied. He was forced to use a bucket or later plastic bottles and newspapers. And as he grew older, he actually devised this system where he would funnel urine through a series of straws to empty it through a hole in the window. So, you know, he would urinate into these bottles and then he would have to get rid of it. So he would create that system through straws, and there was like a tiny hole in the window where he would be able to like funnel it out. So it's just totally like total depravity, really. So reports say that on weekends, the boy's father would let him out of the room when his stepmother was out of the house for the day. So he would let him, maybe watch TV or help with yard work. For food, he received just 2 sandwiches and 2 glasses of water a day, which is barely enough to survive. The room had no heating or air conditioning, which left him to endure super hot summers and then freezing winters in isolation. And on the rare occasions when visitors would come to the house, he was ordered to stay silent. If he behaved, his stepmother would promise him more time outside the room. So obviously she was using freedom as sort of this, weapon to control him. So she kind of said, if you behave today, you might be let outside of the room more often tomorrow or something like that. So pretty awful. So Craig Sullivan, the boy's biological father, died about a year ago, just in 2024. I think it was early 2024. And USA Today reports that, quote, following his father's death, the victim would only be let out 1 minute a day to let the family dog out in the back of the property. According to the warrant, he was locked in his room between 22 to 24 hours a day, he told police, end quote. And according to an arrest warrant that was obtained by USA Today, upon exiting the home on the night of the fire, and if you saw the video, you would have seen that they blurred out the male victim's, footage of him. So it's just like, pixelated. You can't see him because he's not being identified, and, they're trying to keep his identity a secret or, under wraps at this time. But, upon exiting the home on the night of the fire, his hair was matted, quote, he was very dirty, end quote, and all of his teeth were rotten. So to bathe himself, the victim said that he had to use clean water from another bottle that he kept in his room. According to the warrant, he was not provided soap or shampoo to wash the hair that he told police he had not cut in 3 years. The charging document states it had been 3 years since it was cut, and when he did cut it, he cut it himself. So he must have somehow gotten access to scissors or some type of way to cut his own hair. So just a horrible state of affairs, really. And he said that his only real connection to the outside world was a radio that was kept outside of his bedroom. And along with a calendar, he told police that he utilized this radio to keep track of the time. So that's how he kind of knew what month it was, what day it was, because he really was not able to go outside really at all, except to let his dog out. In the last year after his father died and it was just him and his stepmother, he would only be let outside 1 minute a day to let the dog out because apparently she couldn't do that herself. So for education, despite being on a 4th grade reading level, the stepson was given 3 to 4 books a year. He told police that he used the books and a dictionary to ultimately educate himself. He told police that he knew hand sanitizer was flammable because, quote, he read, end quote. So on the day of the fire, Kimberly, the stepmother, initially told detectives that she did not know what happened and that she woke up to the smoke and went to her stepson's room. She figured that her stepson ran through the fire because he ended up outside of the room. When asked if her stepson was diagnosed with any medical conditions, she responded that, quote, he has a lot of problems but isn't diagnosed with any conditions, end quote, as his father was against using doctors. Kimberly said that she took her stepson to a psychiatrist a few times because he mentioned hurting himself in the past. So it's very clear that he's been living in horrible conditions. And the craziest fact about all of this is that it was really 20 years since he was really let outside of the house or outside of the property. Because, of course, he would be let outside for like a minute to take the dog out, but he never really left the property for over 20 years, which was actually pretty crazy. And then when you think to yourself, how could this child just be kept in that house for 20 years without anyone sort of coming over to check in or like questioning where he was? Because obviously he had been in school up until the age of 11, and then he was taken out for homeschooling, quote unquote, by his father and stepmother. So they're actually, during this investigation, the police did dig a little bit deeper into the history of this case, and there had been some warnings that, had they been taken more seriously at the time, could have saved this victim decades of suffering. So actually, over 20 years ago, back in 2004, when the victim was still a child, his school reported concerns to the Department of Children and Families, so DCFS, Teachers had noticed that he was scavenging food from the trash. He was begging classmates for something to eat. And officials conducted a welfare check at the family's home at that time. But the boy says he was forced to lie about the situation. The house appeared clean and well kept, and there were no obvious signs of neglect. So the case was closed. And then the following year, he was pulled from school completely, like I said, at age 11. So with repeated calls to DCFS, the family called the police, claiming that they were being harassed by school officials. So the Waterbury police made a visit to the home at this time again, but there was no immediate evidence of abuse that was found, and there was no evidence of harassment from the school that was found either. And so the boy disappeared behind closed doors, unseen by anyone in the outside world, for the next 2 decades. So he says that he left the house and the property only one time when he was 12 years old. And at that time, he accompanied his father to a waste dump to dispose of some yard waste. And that was when he was 12. He's now in his early 30s. So after that, he never stepped off the property for over 20 years. So when first responders found him in February of 2025, the victim was 5'9" and weighed just 68 pounds. His uncle later described his appearance as, quote, like a Holocaust survivor, end quote. So to me, it's actually crazy that when you look at the fact that DCFS was involved with this child, with this family back in 2004, and basically what the victim said was that he just was told to lie. When he was asked questions, he would just lie about it to the DCFS officers that would come to the house. And apparently the house seemed clean and lived in, and there was no obvious signs of abuse. So the case was closed at that time, which was actually crazy. And when you go and the story unravels and you go into the history of it, it's so crazy to think like all of the abuse that he suffered after that time was really something that could have been prevented. I mean, obviously the earlier stuff before DCFS was involved, I mean, it's horrible, but that was before there was any involvement. But when you think about, that was sort of the moment where, had the intervention been more robust and more actually resulted in something, he really could have been spared that 20 years of abuse that he suffered after that, which is the saddest thing in all of this. So do you have any thoughts so far?
Yeah, like it seems crazy, like you were saying, that there's just a case closed and then he was left just kind of like suffer for decades after that. You'd think like if someone had probable cause enough to contact like child services, that they should just come back randomly, just to do a random check. Don't even tell them you're coming. And then like months later after your case closed, just to like check up. I know that they don't have the resources to check up on people that seem to be fine because they have so many cases that are clearly not fine, but you'd think just do a random check and see those kids that are fine and see if they actually are. Like, I know that's easy to say, but just imagine how many kids could have been saved, just one extra check. I don't know. It's so sad. And yeah, like just the way you described everything is like just disgusting that somebody can do that to a child, to an adult. Like I can't understand how people have zero like sympathy or just zero, like no guilt. I don't know. It's just easier for them to keep their kid locked up. I mean, I don't know. It's like one time I locked my bunny in my bedroom for like 5 hours and I felt so bad about it. And like, I can't imagine, like, I'm not trying to diminish the seriousness, but I mean, I felt bad for days leaving my bunny locked in a room. Like, I can't imagine doing that to an actual person. So it's like beyond my understanding.
And also, yeah, just like also the length of time too. Like if this had gone on for a year, we would all say it was horrible. But the fact that it was over 20 years and that, yeah, somebody could just be walking around, this woman and her husband, who was the biological father, could be walking around just knowing that they were doing this. So either it's like they didn't think they were doing anything wrong, or they did know it was wrong and they just, did it because out of some sick need to punish this child or something. And of course, like I will say, this is still an ongoing investigation and these haven't been proven in court. These are just allegations from the victim. So all of these things are alleged at this time. So Kimberly Sullivan has not been, she's been charged with things that she'll get into, but she hasn't been proven in court to be guilty of any of this. So it's all just alleged at this time. So of course I do want to say that.
Also, it's interesting how you said he was allowed outside for maybe like a minute or something to walk the dog, and you'd think like that would be his opportunity to run, or if there was company over, like that'd be his opportunity to like yell to get attention. But then I don't know, you think about the mindset he must be in, like if I tried something, it's going to get worse for me than it already is. So just like, you know, this is better than it being worse. And then you also think of like Stockholm syndrome, where someone that's kept captive, they kind of like, I don't know, they form like some sort of like bond where they feel like they can't, or they feel like they're responsible to not do anything kind of thing to their captor, which I don't know if this is the case, but I think it's kind of like a survival mechanism where it's like, I need to just to preserve myself, not make things worse kind of. So if he ran or yelled, then it was going to be worse for him. So that's just, he just kind of had to accept what was happening. So I mean, that's super sad when you think of the psychology of that, where it's like, I'm going to live with this so it doesn't get worse. It's sad.
Yeah, and I actually don't know if this is a little bit later in my notes, but I'll just say it now too. Like, he does say that he was so afraid of like worse punishments if he were to get caught trying to escape. So I think there was something where he said he didn't even, because he had a window in this room, and he said he was so afraid to even like try to get someone's attention from outside, because if that didn't result in him being discovered and free, then, and it got back to his parents that, you know, he was trying to do this, he was afraid of what would happen. Would he maybe, because he was getting what, like 2 sandwiches a day or a sandwich a day or something, and 2 glasses of water, and so maybe if they found he was trying to escape, they would give him no food for a day or 2, which would be worse than what he was getting. So I think it was a lot of that too, of really having to be, you know, obviously you want to do anything you can to escape, but you always think of, if I'm not successful, then what is going to be the consequence of that?
Yeah. And also think of how like weak he must have been, like how you described he was only like 68 pounds or something, and this is a full-grown man. So just think, you're not getting enough to eat, you're not getting enough to drink, you don't have the energy to even like fight back or run if you needed to. So you can imagine just like, yeah, how helpless he must have felt as well, just because he really didn't have like the strength or energy or like mental capacity even when you're like starving to even do something like that. So, and also it was interesting that you said that he had found that lighter like a year before he had set this fire. So just like, he must have just like been thinking about a plan this whole time, and just like it took him like a year to even put it in place, like how scared he must have been. So, I mean, it's crazy to think that finally he just had enough. He had enough courage to be like, yeah, I'm gonna attempt this. So yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, and he probably, who knows how many nights before he actually did set the fire, when he thought, okay, this is going to be the night, and then maybe he was afraid to do it or decided not to, and then this was the night that he ultimately chose to, because yeah, he had the lighter for over a year, who knows, and then he gathered the printer paper and the hand sanitizer at other points and just finally decided on this night to do it. And maybe he was just like, because this could have easily failed too, right? Like if his stepmother had noticed the fire, because it was just a small fire at first, right? So maybe if she had noticed it, they were able to put it out and didn't have to involve the police, and then she knew that this was a plan of his, then it could have been really, really worse, and she could have done even worse stuff allegedly to him. So the fact that he was just probably at the point where he's like, you know, I can't go on like this, I need to just do something, and was willing to take that risk, which ultimately for him did result in him getting rescued from this situation. So it was a great thing that he did do it, but it was a huge risk, because it could have very easily been, you know, it could have been foiled by her, and it could have been so worse. And like you said too, like I said, he was 5'9", 32 years old, and just 68 pounds. So this was not somebody who had any type of strength or, you know, endurance to like run even, right? Like if he was taking the dog out for 1 minute, he could have ran But if you're that weak, you're that emaciated, you're 32 years old and 68 pounds, like you're not going to have sort of like the willpower to even run really at that point. And also when you're being deprived of food, you're mentally not quite there either, right? Because your brain can't function normally when you're surviving on barely any food, right? So just so many factors, right? That he wouldn't have really even been physically able enough to try to escape. And if he did, he was afraid of the consequences. So lots of factors there at play. So, and it's just crazy that, yeah, there was that chance in 2004 or 2005 to get that help from the authorities who really did not do anything. So according to ABC News, so quote, the DCF released a statement. So the Department of Children and Families released a statement on Thursday evening. So this is directly from this ABC News article. So shortly after all of this came out, so they released a statement saying that it, quote, has looked extensively at our current and historical databases and to date have been unable to locate any records pertaining to this family nor any records connected to the names of others who have indicated they made reports to our department, end quote. It went on to explain that records about unsubstantiated reports of abuse are typically expunged every 5 years. So basically they were saying that these were unsubstantiated reports, and any reports of this nature get deleted after 5 years, basically. If there's no other reports after that, if there's no credible evidence, then they just wipe their records clean after 5 years. So that's why there would be no record necessarily of this, which is, whether it's true or untrue, this is just what their statement is. And then they go on to say, quote, we will continue our search and ask anyone with additional information to contact the Waterbury Police Department, end quote. And then, quote, as additional information is learned, the department will be as transparent as possible while working within the parameters of both federal and state confidentiality laws, end quote. So about a month after the fire happened that set the victim free, authorities were able to make their move. So on March 12th of 2025, Kimberly Sullivan was arrested and charged with first-degree assault, reckless endangerment, second-degree kidnapping, and first-degree unlawful restraint. So in the days following her arrest, those who had known the victim as a child came forward with their own horror and regret. So authorities actually spoke with his former elementary school principal named Tom Pannone, and he revealed that the school had reported their concerns multiple times, but nothing had been done. So he says, quote, we knew it, we reported it, but not a damn thing was done, and that's the tragedy of this whole thing. Everybody knew something was wrong with this child since he was 5 years old. You knew something was wrong. It was grossly wrong. Sorry we couldn't do more because he went through more than any of us ever will have to go through in our lives, end quote. And so I think, like I said before, people at the school would notice that he would be digging through the trash, or he would be asking his schoolmates, classmates for lunch or for food. And so it was very clear that there was things happening. And so they did make several reports, which is what caused DCFS to even make a visit initially. And then they had made several reports after that. And like I said, Kimberly and her husband, they claimed that they were being harassed by the school, saying that the school was making all of these calls. That's why that they had removed him from school at the age of 11, because they were going to homeschool him because they were just being harassed. So, and I also saw in like comments and stuff too that somebody said, which is a good point, that it should be a major red flag for these departments that if the child is removed from school after several reports, that in of itself is a red flag, because you'd think obviously they're going to remove the child from school to even remove any type of risk that someone will call the authorities again. Because at any time, any of these reports could be the one that pushes it over the edge and is the one that actually leads to something being done. So to kind of mitigate that risk, they just decided, well, we're going to homeschool him. So since the age of 11, he never went back to school. He never did anything. And so that should be a red flag on a file that says, like these departments should be like, okay, we have a series of reports from the school, from different people at the school, and then all of a sudden the parents remove him from school. And yes, they went and did their own investigation because, like I said, they claimed that the school was harassing them, was always making these false claims. So the police and DCFS went back to the house to follow up, and the police said that they didn't find, again, any sign of any wrongdoing. The house was clean. There was no visible signs of abuse. And they also said there was no substantiated evidence or anything of any harassment. that was being done, because they said that they're just harassing us all the time. And I guess in their mind, making these reports was a version of harassment, I guess. So,
yeah,
USA Today.
You think like a huge, I think like a huge red flag, like you were saying, would be like all these reports and complaints coming in, and then all of a sudden they just stop. It's like, well, why have they stopped? You should probably like check that out. I don't think it's because, oh, he's just all of a sudden he's fine. It's because, yeah, he's not in the system, like the school system, for anyone to look out for him anymore. He doesn't have anyone that's there to report it anymore. So it's like that should be a huge thing where, yeah, there's nobody else to check on him. So that has to be our job. We have to go check because he just doesn't have that support around him anymore. So maybe this will be an example of how they can like better the child protective system.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we could go on at length about all the failings of the authorities in this case, but also and there are lots of times too when there are vindictive reports. Like people will be having a dispute and they'll call like CPS because try to get back at the person even though there's unfounded. And I'm sure they're understaffed and they're underfunded, so they don't have the resources or the staff to be able to diligently follow up on every single thing. And a lot of reports do end up being fraudulent, but many times. Yeah, but so it's also like
the school. The school's not going to be fraudulent though. Like your kid's at a school. Like why would the school continually try to follow up, right? Like unless it's vindictive from inside the school, just doesn't seem to make sense in this case.
Yeah. And also it's like, of course the parents are going to say, oh no, they're just harassing us. They're making all these false claims. Like, of course they're going to say that. They're not going to open up and be honest and be like, oh yeah, there is actually probable cause for all these. They're of course going to just write it off as harassment. So you'd think that the authorities on the other end would be like, who are they going to believe? The school, multiple people at the school who are obviously concerned, or are we going to believe the parents of the child who would have reason to lie? Like the school has no reason to lie. And also the school is probably understaffed and underfunded, and they don't have time to harass people. Like they're not going to harass people unless they feel it's not even harassment, but they're not going to make a ton of reports when there's no reason to do it, right? Like obviously there was a cause for concern.
Yeah.
So when you look at one side has no reason to lie and the other side has tons of reasons to lie, who are you going to believe?
Yeah. Why side with the parents in this case? Like it's just super sad that it slipped through the cracks.
Yeah. But then also it's like, you do understand the point of like, okay, they go and do an investigation. The child says everything's fine. There's no signs of abuse at that time. The house seems clean. It's not like he's living in squalor at that time. So and then at one point it's like, you do also have to have probable cause to remove somebody from the home, right? Like you can't just go based on, yes, there's multiple reports, but then you go and do a welfare check and everything seems fine at the time. Then if they did remove the child and it turns out that there was something that was vindictive about these reports, and then there would be there would be an outrage that they removed the child from the parents when there was not probable cause. So it's like you can see both sides of it. And it just so happens that in this case, obviously they should have done something, but I'm sure maybe there's other cases throughout the history of CPS where maybe they did remove a child when there was no probable cause. And then there's a whole outcry about that. So I don't know. It's very, very tricky. I would never want to be a CPS worker or a DCFS worker. So it's really hard to kind of know. It's only in retrospect that, of course, it makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they did their due diligence, right? Like not like they ignored it and didn't do like a house call. Like they actually did. And that's probably all that they were required to do. Yeah, everything looks fine. Case closed. But like I said, there should be another follow-up. Even though it looks fine, they should be protocol for someone to go back unannounced. Yeah, just bust in the house and see what's going on.
Yeah, I do agree. Like it should be like a policy of like you are required to do like 3 follow-ups, random follow-ups, unannounced check-ins. Maybe not 3, 2. I don't know what the number should be, but yeah, there should be some type of policy there that says any time we get reports, we have to do a minimum of however many follow-ups at random times. Because what are the chances if they did do 3 that all 3 were going to result in, not being substantiated? Like I think one of those 3 times, maybe they would have found something, especially when the parents have no time to prepare right? I think it's very likely that they could have found something in one of those 3 follow-up visits.
Yeah. And I mean, if he wasn't eating enough, it doesn't take long for someone to look super skinny, like way skinnier than they should, right? Like even a couple months later, if they had come back, they could probably see a big difference. So, and that would be, you can't hide that when you look at somebody. So, yeah.
But also, and I don't know the logistic of this, but I'm sure maybe an initial visit that is done is unannounced as well. Like, I don't think they would announce it to the parents. They were going to come over at this time. Like, I think they would probably just show up randomly, right? So. Yeah,
but I mean, if CPS is involved, parents probably know that they're coming, so they could just prepare until they do come, kind of thing. I don't know. I don't know how it works actually, if they do have to tell them they're coming or not, but yeah.
Yeah. So again, we don't know that, but basically the point of this whole thing is that 20 years ago, CPS or DCFS was involved. The authorities were involved at some level and didn't do anything that resulted in the victim being removed from the house at any time, which is ultimately the worst and saddest thing about this whole thing. So USA Today reports that, quote, relatives, including his sisters, knew about the situation but did nothing to intervene, end quote. And another follow-up report by CBS News reports that, quote, Sullivan, so Kimberly Sullivan, was in charge, the man told investigators, but his father, who died in 2024, like I said, and stepsisters knew about his treatment. The prosecution states that longtime friends of Kimberly Sullivan knew her for over 20 years, had no idea that she even had a stepson because she never mentioned it and she was never allowed inside the home. So it is one thing also too that did come out was that Kimberly Sullivan had friends for a long time and they actually never even knew she had a stepson because she never talked about it and they never went over it to the home to even know that. So they were even shocked to find out that she had a stepson at all. So that kind of shows you at what lengths Kimberly herself went to keep it under wraps. Because obviously if you're not telling anyone you have a stepson, there's a reason for that. So, because then people would question, why haven't we seen your stepson ever? How can we never see you bring him anywhere or really, right? So
yeah,
I don't know. It's just very...
It also makes me think, like, I wonder what her defense is going to be. Maybe it was because her husband was abusive as well, and so she just had to go along with it. But then you think, like, she continued after he died. I mean, he had only been a year, but maybe she was just so conditioned that she had to kind of go along with it. But then also you think, like, yeah, she had friends. She had so many chances to kind of, like, I don't know, not even to save herself, but like save her stepson if she really wanted to. I mean, if she was a victim of abuse as well, like that's easier said than done. But I mean, yeah, it makes me think like, what's her defense going to be? Do we know that at all? Or is she going to blame it all on him? Like her husband? And then, yeah.
Yeah. Well, like actually I do go into that a little bit in this next part here. So as the case unfolds in court, her attorney is urging the public not to rush to conclusions. So, quote, he says, these are just allegations. That's why we have due process, end quote. He defends his client and said that it was the victim's late father who was responsible. He was not locked in the room. She did not restrain him in any way. She provided food. She provided shelter. She is blown away by these allegations, end quote. And that's what her lawyer has told the press. But for the man who lived through it all, this child who had been forgotten and trapped behind locked doors for over 20 years, the damage has already been done. Now finally free, he begins the long road to recovery. So as for Kimberly herself, her bond was actually posted at $300,000, which was paid. So she was out on bail awaiting trial for the allegations against her. She claims that she is just shocked at the charges against her and that she has done nothing wrong. If convicted on these charges, she could face up to 47 years in prison, which is essentially a life sentence because she is 56 years old. So she would be like 103 years old if she got out after 47 years. So Kimberly actually appeared in court on March 28th, which was just 2 days ago from the time of this recording, and she pled not guilty to all the charges. She was ordered to wear a GPS tracking device while out on bail. The judge did, but the prosecution wanted her actually to be under house arrest, but the judge denied that request. So he didn't say that. The judge said that she could not be on house arrest, but that she would have to wear this GPS tracker and that she's not a flight risk or anything like that while she's out on bail. So after the hearing, Kimberly's attorney made this statement, quote, "While we respect today's decision by the court, we stand firmly behind the arguments we put forth. I urge everyone to remember what the judge made clear on the record, that the allegations facing Ms. Sullivan are just that, allegations. We are confident about the facts of this case, and the evidence to be presented will make it crystal clear to a jury that Ms. Sullivan is not the monster that some in the public and the media portray her to be." And she is due again in court on April 22nd. So basically her defense is that she's saying she did nothing wrong, and based on earlier claims that I said that she had said that the boy's father wouldn't let him go to regular doctors or wouldn't do like stuff like that. So basically it's clear, I think, that the defense is going to be that really he was the aggressor, the father, and that she was just also probably a victim of him. But like you said, he died in 2024, and there was a year where it was just her and the victim, and she still continued those things. And apparently, according to the victim, it got worse after her father died, or after his father died. He says that before, his father used to let him out of the room when Kimberly was away. So during the afternoon, like for a few hours, he would let him out to watch TV. He would let him maybe, help, out of the room. And she didn't really know about that. So based on that, it seems like maybe she was more the aggressor and he was just following her orders, the father. And after he died, she didn't really have to, there was nothing to keep her from being worse, right? Like if he was maybe, who knows what he told her or whatever, but if he was, I don't know. It's just so confusing because it's like, it's still his son. So he still is obviously a horrible person, the father, because he's kind of going along with it, even if he is letting him out during the afternoon when Kimberly's gone. Like he's still not doing anything to help him, really. He's not calling the police. He's not leaving the house. It's just very, very weird. So based on this, it seems like Kimberly was the aggressor, but then her defense is, of course, that it's going to be probably that it was him who was more of the aggressor and she was also a victim. But then you have that year after he died where she let him out of the house even less and stuff like that. So I really don't know, or who knows if we'll ever know the truth of it, but it's just very, very weird. And clearly, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it'll be interesting if like anybody that Kimberly knows will come forward, like her friends. Because I mean, if they could tell like what kind of personality she was, if she was very like dominating, if she was like an aggressor, I feel like that would come out in her personality. But if she was like abused or just like someone that was going to go along with an abusive husband, then that's also like, you could tell, I think, in someone's personality if they're very like meek and shy and aren't going to say anything bad about their husband, and if she needs permission to do things. Like I don't know, like I wonder what their perspective is, if they saw anything wrong at all. And maybe even like in retrospect, if they're like knowing all this and they look back, I wonder if they're going to like put things together to be like, yeah, now it does seem obvious. Or if they're completely shocked. Like I'm super curious to see what their perspective is on all this. Like the outside perspective, like the only other people really that have some sort of perspective on this since his father's died. So interesting.
Yeah, it's and I'm sure like if they do, like I said, she did plead not guilty, so there will be probably a trial. And at this time, who knows, she might plead guilty later. But as of right now, she's pleading not guilty. So I think if there is a trial, then they are probably going to bring character witnesses on the stand, like her friends and people who knew her who could speak to that, or maybe people who knew the boy's father and can maybe say horrible things about him. The defense is probably going to bring horrible character witnesses for him to say that he was a horrible person, to kind of paint this picture that he was more of the aggressor. And I'm sure that the male victim in this case is going to also have to take the stand to testify. So that's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. And yeah, so her attorney is saying that it's all just allegations. She's completely shocked by this and that she has no idea why she's being charged with this, which to me seems ridiculous. But so CNN actually reported, so there was a hearing on March 26th, so just this past Wednesday, and I think she was supposed to be kind of have her full arraignment on that date, but then they pushed it to the Friday, the 28th. But on 26th, right after the court appearance, a woman named Tracy Valorand. She identified herself as the biological mother of the male victim. And she said that she gave up custody of her son when he was just 6 months old. Quote, I thought he was going to be with his father where he was safe. That didn't turn out to be the case. I was not expecting him being locked in a room. End quote. She added, explaining that she had searched for her son multiple times over the years, but did not know where his father and where Kimberly had moved. She said that she does not know her son's current location or condition. Quote, when he is healthier and he's stronger, if he wants a relationship with me, I am right here. I am not going anywhere. End quote. And I actually, just yesterday, I watched an interview with Court TV. So Tracy did an interview, a live interview with Court TV. And she kind of states her case, because I think a question I had was, yes, the mother was out of the boy's life since he was about 2. Which was the original reports, was that she left his life when he was about 2 and the abuse started when he was 3. But she says that she kind of gave her son to his father when he was just 6 months old. So we'll go with that because that's what she's saying. And she says that her son's father kind of just shut her out of his life. She explained that when they were together, he wasn't a bad person. So she never imagined that he was capable of doing something like this to their son. And she and in this interview, she kind of is speculating that maybe perhaps he did this out of spite after their breakup and took it out on their child if he was angry about that. I don't know. That's just kind of something she says, but of course we'll never really know that. At the time that she lost contact, Tracy said that she was dealing with some personal struggles that were completely unrelated to this case. And she said she believed it was in her son's best interest to give him to his father, whom she had always known as a good man. So, however, she obviously now realizes that wasn't the case. And she also confirmed that she had never met Kimberly Sullivan before at all. And so, like I said, then they ended up moving and she had no idea where they moved to. She tried to reconnect with her son over the years. She says that his father had agreed at one point to bring him to this location where he would often take his son out for walks. But despite her going there and waiting for hours, they would just never show up. And she also says that her ex-brother-in-law, so it's her son's uncle, so the victim's uncle, also worked with her and tried to arrange a meeting at his house. But again, the father never followed through. So it kind of seems like she was in contact with her ex-husband, Craig Sullivan, the boy's father, for a period of time and had tried to make these arrangements to go and have her visit with him. But he would just never show up, never follow through with that. And she didn't know where they lived, so she couldn't just go to the house and demand to see him. She first learned about this case really when her sister called her after the news broke and said, quote, we found him, end quote. So, and in this interview, she's, very, very emotional, and she's clearly very regretful that she gave her son away to his father to live with. And this is what he hasn't been enduring for all these years. So that's kind of like a newer development that we heard from her, because originally I was like, where does she fall in all of this? Like, yes, she was out of his life since he was 6 months or since he was 2, but where does she fall? So good to kind of have that interview to get a little bit of her perspective. And it is clear that she did make some attempts to reconnect with him, but that she was just being kept from him by his father. So given that, I really don't know. Clearly, I think the boy's father and Kimberly were in on it together. But in terms of who was more of the aggressor, or maybe who originally was more of the aggressor and the other person just went along with it and then became more involved later, those are all information that we're probably going to see come out in a trial. We're going to see Kimberly's full perspective. Maybe they will call the boy's biological mother up to the stand as well to be part of this trial, and just to get some more information on that, because there's still a lot of stuff that we just don't know. But it's just crazy to me that he lived in these conditions for over 20 years and nobody was able to stop it. Not the authorities, not any family, no friends, not even his own mother. It's just very, very crazy to me. So Kate, I guess, what are your thoughts on that last piece I mentioned about his biological mother, if you have any kind of initial thoughts?
Yeah, my initial thoughts are I can't imagine the guilt she probably feels, and she might never get over that or forgive herself, because, she thinking if she just had tried a little bit harder to see her son, maybe she could have intervened. But yeah, of course you never would think that that's what's happening. So you can't, blame her for everything, of course. But yeah, it's so sad that there was like almost like all these little chances everywhere that could have helped him, but just, yeah, obviously the stepmother were determined to keep him hidden and away from everybody because nobody else was able to like get through. So it's just, yeah, it's very sad that he fell through the cracks and was hidden from the world for decades. Very sad.
Yeah. And we've done similar cases to this, like on the podcast before. We did the Turpin family, the House of Horrors there with like 13 children, I think, and how that all happened. We did the Ruby Frankie one this season, the YouTube mom that was doing it. So they're all very, very unique and all have their own specific details. And this one to me just stands out as being so, I don't know, it's just crazy to me that this child basically disappeared after 2004 and no one ever saw the child again, ever, except his two guardians.
I also find it crazy that horrible. Like it's hard for me to believe that like one parent or one person would do this to a child or their children, but then to know that like both of them agree and are like, yeah, and they just continue to do it. Like it's hard to believe that like two people like that came together and are agreeing to like abuse a child for his whole life. Like that just seems crazy. You think one of them would step up and be like, this is fucked, but no, they're both just like, yeah, let's just do it. I don't know. Like those situations where like one of them could have stepped up, but no, in his case, just like both of his guardians were like, we're gonna do this. Sad.
Yeah, it's so crazy. And that's why I always tend to think that there's usually probably one person who's more of the initiator in it. Originally, there's probably one person who's more into it or wants to do it, and the other person just like out of their love for that person or fear, or if they're a victim of them, then goes along with it, and then maybe they take over, as we see in this case. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how it all plays out, because like I said, her side's going to be that he was the aggressor and she was more, and I would love to see kind of her explanation for that year since he died in 2004 to when the victim was finally free, how she can sort of explain how in that year, even though the main abuser or aggressor was dead, why it still continued. I'm just interested to hear that sort of whole defense, because I think that's really where the bulk of her case is going to fall apart if it does. Like, I think if his biological father had still been alive and they were both arrested and she tried to pin it on him, then maybe you could say, oh, she was a victim as well. She was maybe being abused and she was afraid. But you can't really, after he died a year ago, justify why it continued after that if she's totally innocent.
Yeah, my guess is going to be that, she's going to blame it on like the trauma that he put her through and like post-traumatic stress, and she just like was mentally just couldn't get out of that cycle that he made her be in for decades. Like I feel like that's going to be her defense, something like that anyway.
Yeah. So, and like I said, at this time she's pleading not guilty. Her attorney is, saying it's all just allegations, and that they are confident that the proof is going to show that she is not guilty. But like I said, if she is convicted on these charges, she could face up to 47 years in prison. I think it's like 45 for the main charges, and then which were felony charges, and then like a couple of years additional for the misdemeanors that are in there as well. So very sad and crazy. And like I said, there's other details out there about like the specific like conditions and stuff that he went through. I didn't go into full in depth, but you kind of got the point from what I went over. It's just horrible. So we will kind of put some resources. So if you are in Canada, just know that you can call the kids help phone if you are experiencing child abuse of any sort. You can call the kids help phone free of charge at 1-800-668-6868, or you can text connect, CONNECT, to 686868, and that is Canada specific. If you are in the US, there is the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline, so you can call 1-800-422-4453. You can also text HELP, HELP, to 1-800-422-4453. We also will put that information in the show notes as well. So look below in the show notes for the full numbers and how to text those organizations for help. So that does it for this week's case. We're going to be updating you as we go along. We'll probably do an episode in the future with updates because it's really just the beginning of this. The trial's probably still a few years away. We'll see if she eventually changes her plea, or if it does go to a full trial, and obviously we'll keep you updated and do another follow-up episode as it evolves. So that does it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next week for a brand new case. So in the meantime, you can follow us on all the social medias. So you can follow us on Instagram, Crime Family Podcast. We're on TikTok as well. The link is in the show notes. Crime Family Podcast on TikTok, Facebook, Crime Family Podcast. You can email us at crimefamilypodcast@gmail.com for case suggestions, feedback on the show, anything you'd like to let us know. You can leave us a review, leave us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you listen to the show. We're also on YouTube, Crime Family Podcast. Just search Crime Family Podcast on YouTube and you'll find us there, but also the links are in the show notes as well. So thank you so much, and until next time, take care. Bye.
Bye.